Part 60. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 591. With the enrollment of freshmen from government schools, rents in the Kangxiu Street area have risen. But their homeowner, the Yu family, did not raise the price, and still rented it to them at the previous price. In Yu's words, if it weren't for them, his house would not be rented out at a low price, let alone sold at a reasonable price in the future. It's like the Xiao family across the street now. Now the rent in Kangxiu Street has risen a lot, and there are still many people who cannot rent a house. Although the Xiao family is in prison, they have also put their house in the dental office. But basically, people just inquired about it, and no one rented it even if the rent was reduced to 1 or 2 a month. In particular, most of the renters in Kangxiu Street are scholars, and scholars pay special attention to their reputation. If you are just haunted rumors like Yu's house, the tenants will say you don't speak, strange power and chaos when you live in it, but if you choose to live in Xiao's house, even if you behave upright and sit upright, outsiders will speculate, do you have similar tastes with the Xiao family? Or suspect that he is also interested in the Yan family next door. Wei Chen followed them to the alley, looked outside, and praised, "This location is good, quiet in the middle of the noise, perfect for reading. Hey, this place looks familiar, I seem to have heard of this place when I came here." Bai Shanbao invited him in, and said with a smile, "This alley has been haunted before, so Brother Wei may have heard of it." "Ah, I remembered. I heard that in order to occupy the neighbor's house, a family deliberately pretended to be ghosts and scares people, but they were smashed by 3 children. You guys are back." Bai Erlang, who was finally freed from his studies, ran out of the study like crazy when he heard Bai Shanbao's voice, and when he ran to the gate of the courtyard, he found that there was one more person, and quickly stopped in his tracks. Bai Shanbao and Wei Chen introduced, "This is my junior brother, Bai Chen, second in the family, and this is our new friend, Wei Chen, Mr. Wei Lang." Wei Chen immediately smiled and said, "My parents only have one son, so you can call me Wei Da." He paused slightly, looked at the 3 standing together suspiciously, and asked hesitantly, "The 3 children who discovered the haunting of the Xiao family in the legend?" "It's us," Man Bao said, "but the rumors are a bit untrue, we are not children anymore." Wei Chen smiled sheepishly, but was a little curious, "How did you find out that the Xiao family was haunted in the first place?" "We didn't find out," Bai Shanbao said with a slight smile, "we thought he was a real ghost, so we wanted to have a chat with him, but he was so timid, so he yelled, and then we knew he was a ghost, it's fake." "Wei Chen." Bai Shanbao took him to meet Mr. Zhuang. Mr. Zhuang was completely surprised that Bai Shanbao made friends so early and brought them home as a guest. "If this is full of treasures, then it is reasonable, Shanbao." Mr. Zhuang looked suspiciously at Bai Shan's face, and when he looked up at Wei Chen, he showed a kind smile. "Forget it, I'll ask later, and now I'll greet the guests first." One of the great advantages of having a cook at home is that they no longer have to worry about not having enough food for guests who suddenly come to visit. Because she can add dishes at any time, in addition to dishes, there are also some snacks that the masters love to eat, not only Bai Erlang, but Man Bao and Bai Shanbao also like it very much. The cook finally bought enough materials for the kitchen in one day, so she spent half the afternoon making some snacks. As soon as the guests came, she served the snacks. Since coming to Yizhu, the 3 of them haven't had dim sum made by the cook for a long time. Man Bao calculated with his fingers, feeling very emotional, "It's been more than a month." "Yes, it's been more than a month." Bai Shanbao also sighed in the same way, then gave Wei Chen a moment, and gave the husband a piece of snack, and took one and ate it contentedly. Wei Chen took a sip and said with a smile, "Your dim sum is indeed delicious, and it's no worse than the ones outside." "How come it's been more than a month?" "My cook just arrived yesterday." After a little thought, Wei Chen understood that they had only just entered school, and it seemed that this cook was assigned later. Then he was shocked by the wealth of Bai Shan's family, and thought to himself, even his family, his father didn't say that he would be accompanied by a cook, Longzhou Bai family. Wei Chen was a little embarrassed. It seemed that he had to write to ask his father about the Bai family in Longzhou. Mr. Zhuang was very kind to people, and his experience was there, so although he didn't deliberately inquire, he had a few words with Wei Chen, and when he asked about his family, he guessed the origin of the other party. Mr. Zhuang smiled slightly. It turns out that your father is the governor of Longzhou Wei. Wei Chen didn't expect him to recognize his father's name as soon as he said it, a little embarrassed. Mr. Zhuang knows my father. After a pause, Mr. Zhuang smiled and said, I just saw it, but it was a long time ago. I didn't expect you to be so old. Wei Chen smiled a little embarrassedly, knowing that he probably met his father's acquaintance, but he didn't know it. Mr. Zhuang asked, I just entered the government school, is there anything I'm not used to? That's not true, and the school has not officially started classes. Mr. Zhuang nodded, we have to wait for a few days. Some students have traveled a long way here, so they don't bring many books, so there are many things that are missing. Therefore, these 2 days are considered as the finishing time given by the school. In fact, there is no need to be so anxious. Ask the instructor about the books to be taught this year, buy these first, and then add the rest slowly. Mr. Zhuang has been a student in the government school for many years. Although a long time has passed, the school is more stubborn than the court, so even after many years, most of the school has not changed. Not even the scenery changed much, let alone other things. So Mr. Zhuang's experience is worth listening to. As for some experiences, Mr. Zhuang didn't tell Bai Shanbao because he wanted him to experience it himself, but he mentioned it to Wei Chen, which might not be very useful, so it was just a reminder. It was the first time for Bai Shanbao to hear some things, so he was a little unhappy. After eating dinner and sending Wei Chen away, he complained to Mr. Zhuang, Sir, why did you tell him, but didn't tell me, old students, the official's preference? Mr. Zhuang asked with a smile, I told you, will you try to curry favor with those school officials? Bai Shanbao paused and said, no. That's all right, Mr. Zhuang said with a smile, your personality is different from his, and it would be a waste of time to tell you these things. By the way, why do you think of bringing friends home as guests? Since they are friends, they can naturally be brought home as guests. Mr. Zhuang glanced at him with a half-smile, and said, have you known a friend for a long time? Bai Shanbao lowered his head and smiled in embarrassment, but he didn't tell his husband that he was targeted by the school officials in the school. Mr. Zhuang didn't ask again, but sighed, although the government school is still a school, but because it has already involved the officialdom, so the worldly knowledge has become a study. Although it is not as good as the court's intrigues, there are also many competitions. It can be regarded as a school. It's a small court. The next update will be around 8 p.m. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 592. Mr. Zhuang said, you have always been proud. When you were in Qilai village, you were all innocent people. You can't help but lack in these aspects. So this time when you enter the school, you will have a harder time than others at the beginning, especially you are more difficult than others. Students are younger and more visible. Mr. Zhuang is not stupid, not to mention that he only needs to be in charge of 3 disciples now. Even though Bai Shanbao has done a good job, there is still some gloom on his face. It was fine yesterday, and even this morning when I went out, I was mostly excited. Why did I only go out for a day, and then came back and changed? He didn't ask Bai Shanbao what happened in the school, but told him, no matter what happens, I just hope you can remember that you go to the school to study. Mr. Zhuang said, the prefectural school has a big exam every year. As long as your grades are good enough, you can not only be in Class A, but you can also go further than the students who enrolled in the same year, and even directly get a place to go to the Imperial College. Mr. Zhuang got up and walked to the window, turned his back to Bai Shanbao and said softly, "There are very few good students in the government school in the past 2 years. I heard that among the students who entered Beijing last year, only 2 were admitted to the 6th school. You know that means what?" Bai Shanbao was slightly stunned, and asked, "Yes, who is so weak? Are there only 2 people who passed the exam? In the past, there should be no less than 20 people who passed the exam every year in the entire Jianese Road, and at least 10 of them came from Yizhu Prefecture School." Mr. Zhuang didn't finish his sentence, but the meaning was very clear. Bai Shanbao's eyes brightened and he understood. The current number of admissions has dropped directly to the 2, regardless of what the Jidushi and the governor's mansion think. The mansion school must be very sad. So it doesn't matter why he was targeted, as long as his grades are good enough. Thinking of those who targeted him, Bai Shanbao sneered. Mr. Zhuang turned around to look at him, and seeing that he understood, he smiled and waved his hands. "Okay, it's getting late, go wash up, you guys have to wash your clothes later." When the sun was setting, Zhou Lejun collected his clothes and went to the river to wash them with them. At the moment, they are the only ones who come to the river to wash clothes. They are very comfortable and occupy a stone, and then chat while washing clothes. Bai Erlang was particularly envious of Man Bao. "You went out for a long time today, but my husband didn't even ask, when will I be like you?" Man Bao, "That's difficult. First you have to be self-disciplined, then you have to study well, and finally you have to be a lady." Bai Erlang snorted, threw the clothes in his hands into the water, stirred them, then dragged them up and beat them. Bai Shanbao turned his head and told Man Bao what Mr. said to him just now, and said, "I don't know how well the gentlemen of the government school are. How about we preview the textbooks at night?" Man Bao nodded, "All right." Zhou Lejun silently washed the clothes beside him. She understood some words, but she didn't understand some words very well. Sure enough, my aunt was right, reading more books is still very useful, at least not so that I can't even understand some words. For example, she didn't know why my sister-in-law was so excited and happy when Master Bai Shan said that there were only 2 people admitted in the Beijing entrance examination last year. Zhou Lejun couldn't help turning his head to talk to her sister-in-law. "Sister-in-law, I want to read too." "No problem, I brought all my books this time. What book do you want to read?" "What book do you think I should read?" Man Bao thought for a while and said, "Why don't you read history books, starting with Spring and Autumn? If you don't understand, you can ask me, or you can ask your husband." Zhou Lejun had a headache. "Sister-in-law, Spring and Autumn is really difficult." Man Bao never eats alone, and the same is true for books, so they are allowed to read the books in her room. After graduating from the school, the big head and the others stopped turning the pages of the book, and at most occasionally read a few sentences along with the third and the others when they memorized. An Arya has read the books in Man Bao's study, but none of them are her favorite. Unlike the catchy 1,000 characters, which is easier to understand and storytelling, the Analects of Confucius or the Beautiful Book of Songs, the rest of the books in Man Bao's room are very difficult to read. Even Zhou Lejun is persevering, and usually can't sit still after reading 2 pages. Man Bao understood her feelings, and said, "I've broken out good sentences in the books I've read, and they are easy to read. If you want to read vernacular, then only travel notes and story books are suitable." Man Bao couldn't help but glance at Bai Shanbao and Bai Erlang. After thinking about it, he felt that reading the travel notes was pretty good, and the story books were also very good looking. So he whispered to Zhou Lejun, "I haven't bought travel notes and story books, but they both have them. I'll borrow them for you later." Zhou Lejun didn't understand, since it was a borrowing book, why didn't he borrow it now? The 4 of them were talking, and finally finished washing their clothes before it was completely dark, and then walked home with the tub in their arms. After drying the clothes, Man Bao went to find Bai Erlang. Bai Erlang said nervously, don't ask me. At the riverside just now, although she and Zhou Lejun were whispering, they were not far away, so Bai Erlang naturally heard it too. So without waiting for Man Bao to speak, he refused first. Man Bao didn't believe it. You must have it. If you don't share the book, are you still not a friend? My father asked your fourth brother to bring all my books to me. Do you think my father will give me travel notes and story books? You had it in your carry-on luggage before. Bai Erlang, no. Man Bao clenched his fists and looked at him. Bai Erlang said with a guilty conscience, then, those books are not for young ladies to read. It's strange, I've read all your words. Bai Erlang, so the master cut him. Will you give it or not? I'll go to Mr. Wang. Bai Erlang was angry, you traitor, when you go to the bookstore, you will also look for miscellaneous books. Sir knows. Shirajiro. Luckily, Bai Erlang still lay down on the ground, pulled out a box from under the bed, opened it, and found that it was full of clothes. He reached out and groped in the clothes, took out a book, glanced at it, and stuffed it back. Continue to touch. Man Bao poked his head to look curiously. Although his movements were fast, they were still not as fast as her eyes. Spring is all over the world. I haven't read this book, show me it. Bai Erlang slammed the box shut, stared wide-eyed and said, do you want any more? If you want it, just step aside. I can only give you a book. Man Bao took a step back, spread his hands and said, okay. Seeing that she couldn't see the side, Bai Erlang opened the box again and buried himself in the search. He found one, stuffed it back, found one, stuffed it back again. Man Bao. Not only Man Bao was speechless, but Bai Shanbao, who was lying on the window and looking in, was also speechless. He stretched his neck curiously to look in, but found that he couldn't see anything, so he crawled onto the windowsill before he knew it, stretched his neck and looked over. Man Bao turned his head boredly, and suddenly saw the person on the window, took a step back in fright, and almost cried out. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 593. Bai Shanbao gave a shh, telling her not to disturb Bai Erlang. Man Bao glanced back at Bai Erlang, who was buried in the box, walked to the edge of the windowsill, and asked curiously, why don't you go through the door instead of the window? Bai Shanbao said quietly, you didn't call me either. Man Bao, but this is your room, you need us to call you when you go back to your room. Bai Shanbao paused for a moment, then realized belatedly, yes, Bai Erlang moved into his room today, this is his room. Bai Shanbao glanced at Man Bao, turned around and crawled out, then entered the room through the door with his hands behind his back, and walked around the screen. Man Bao, just jump down, why do you have to climb out and come in through the door? Because he is stupid. Bai Erlang finally found the book, standing quietly behind the two of them. Bai Shanbao rolled his eyes at him unceremoniously and said, you are stupid, this is also my room, of course I have to walk in openly. He reached out and took the book from Bai Erlang's hand, turned it over and stared, are you talking about ghosts? That's right, be afraid, little ladies are not suitable for reading such books. Man Bao turned over and said, it's okay, I'll take a look first. When Bai Shanbao heard this, he was unhappy, and immediately took the book out of her hand. You agreed to study with me, how can you read miscellaneous books? It's just for fun, and it won't take up the time for studying. I believe it's your fault, Bai Shanbao said, Last time you read that Chenzhou travel notes and said the same thing, but you read it for 3 days and even copied my homework. No, I will take the mid-year exam before, you are not allowed to read miscellaneous books. Man Bao. Bai Shanbao flipped through the pages, and said decisively, let's keep this book for Bai Erlang first. I have a few travel notes that I have read. Let Zhou Lijun read that one first. Bai Erlang immediately snatched the book back, nodding repeatedly, but the master also refused to show them the book of strange tales, saying that it would change their temperament. Zhou Lijun is not a person who is very good at concealing at first glance. If his husband reads the book, he will definitely think that they are the ones who did it. When the time comes, you will know when you ask. Bai Erlang felt that his homework was already heavy enough, and he didn't want to add more to it. Man Bao reluctantly glanced at Bai Erlang's book, then pushed Bai Shanbao to find it. Show me, what does your travel diary look like? Bai Shanbao smiled, and led her around the screen, and then around the screen, he directly lifted the quilt, and took out 2 books from under the pillow for her. Man Bao was disappointed after only one glance. She had read both of these travel notes, including Chenzhou travel notes. Occasionally, you can double it when you have free time. But she has no free time, she still has to go to the teaching room in the system to attend classes at night, and occasionally flips through the medical books brought out of the system during the day. She is really busy. I am so busy that it is difficult to reread a travel note that I have already read. Man Bao sighed, took the book and said disappointedly, okay, I'll take the book to her. Man Bao handed the travel notes to Zhou Lijun, and said, you read the travel notes first, and when you feel that you can read the history books later, you should read some history books. Zhou Lijun asked, why do you have to read history books? I remember that my sister-in-law should study university after studying Book of Songs. Because there is a saying called taking the past as a mirror, using history as a mirror, you can not only know the ups and downs, but also know the honor and disgrace, and think about the gains and losses. I know you. You study for nothing else, just to not fall behind. So history books are must-reads. Zhou Lijun was slightly stunned, then hugged Man Bao, and shouted, you are so kind, sister. Her eyes were slightly red, she buried her head in Man Bao's neck, raised her head after a long time, and asked with a serious face, sister-in-law, do you think I can become very powerful in the future, very powerful? Man Bao asked, how powerful? That's right, Zhou Lijun thought for a while and said, I have a lot of money, I earned it myself. Man Bao asked distressedly, how do you earn money? Zhou Lijun shook his head, I want to be an accountant. I inquired about it when I was in the county. Generally, an accountant in a shop costs at least 1 or 2 taels of silver a month. Before coming here, she had thought about this, and she said, I want to search to see if there is any shop that is willing to recruit me as an apprentice. Man Bao asked, what if I meet a bad person? So I want to find some shops run by women, and I'll look for them tomorrow. Zhou Lijun clenched the book in his hand and said, but I don't think I'm very good, and I'm afraid others won't use me. She felt that if she was as powerful as her sister-in-law, she would have a higher chance of success. Zhou Lijun looked at my sister regretfully, and asked casually, sister, when you grow up, what do you want to do to make money? Man Bao thought for a while and said, do you want to be a doctor? It's even more difficult for a doctor. Sister-in-law, you have only prescribed prescriptions for our family and villagers. Most people still don't use it. Man Bao scratched his head and said, when I get better, I'll go out and try to treat people. Zhou Lijun, doctors are also men. The aunt and nephew sighed together, really, why do all the outsiders have to be men? It was getting late, and the two of them were only sad for a while, and then Zhou Lijun began to feel sorry for the oil lamp, and after putting away the book, he said, I'll read it tomorrow. Man Bao has to go back to his side to attend classes in the system. There are two screens and a small outer room between the two beds, which is very private. Man Bao lay down on the bed, put down the mosquito net, and entered the systematic teaching room for class. Maybe it's because every day is very fulfilling, or maybe it's because he is still young and has nothing to worry about. Man Bao came out after class, lay on the bed and wanted to review the medical skills he had just learned, but he just opened his head and left. Fell asleep. Bai Shanbao and Bai Erlang next door also fell asleep as soon as they touched the pillows. This surprised even Bai Shanbao himself. He thought he would lose sleep tonight if he was so angry during the day. Who knew he would sleep so well? The next day he woke up on time, and as soon as he went out, he saw Man Bao also yawning and going out. The two looked at each other, then said hello, and together they took the wooden basin to fetch water to wash their face. Man Bao said, "Then I will go to the bookstore to buy books today, and I will start previewing the textbooks when I come back." "Okay," Bai Shanbao asked after a pause, "do you have money? Do you want me to pay some? After all, you are studying with me." Man Bao shook his head, "No need, the book is for me to read, not for you to learn. I looked at your book list, and there are some books that the teacher wants to teach, and I should have bought them." And Man Bao raised his chin confidently and said, "Why do I have no money?" The next update will be around 10 p.m. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 594. Bai Shanbao only took one look, then lowered his head to wipe his face and hands, and poured water into her flowers and plants, and said, "No matter how rich you are, I don't have money." Man Bao snorted and poured the water in the basin, then turned and went back to the room. After Bai Shanbao combed his hair, he found that Bai Erlang was still lying on the bed opposite him, so he couldn't help knocking on his screen. "The sun is about to come out, don't worry, Sir is coming with a stick." Bai Erlang turned over, burrowed slowly and burrowed directly into the quilt, pretending he didn't hear. Man Bao passed by, and when he heard the words, he took out a piece of firewood from the firewood pile, quietly lurked outside the window, and stretched out his hand to push his window. Bai Shanbao, who went out, saw it, and immediately turned back, quietly opened the window for her, then coughed lightly and walked out the door as if nothing happened. Man Bao stretched the stick in, aimed at the bulging place, and yanked it. As a result, the quilt moved a little, and then there was no movement at all. Man Bao was stunned for a moment, glanced at the stick, and couldn't help but change it to a bucket. He poked it, but when there was no movement, he poked it again. Seeing that she hadn't succeeded for a long time, Bai Shanbao couldn't help pushing a stick for her, and then Bai Erlang, who had been moving around on the bed, got angry, lifted the quilt and sat up, shouting, "Bai Shan, you are enough, what?" Seeing that there was no Bai Shanbao on the bed, he followed the stick and turned his head to look out the window angrily. Then his expression froze, and he called out in a low voice and guiltily, "Sir." Mr. Zhuang glanced at the stick in his hand, then at Bai Erlang, took the stick back and said, "It's almost Sunday, can you pay me back?" Bai Erlang let out a soft "oh," lifted the quilt and got up. Mr. Zhuang stretched out his hand to help him close the window, then he looked at the two disciples standing aside with their heads bowed, nodded them with a stick and said, "Naughty, since you have so much energy, today I will punish you for writing 5 more big characters." Bai Shanbao /U0026 Man Bao, so busy. But the two didn't dare to resist, they bowed their heads and complied. Mr. Zhuang handed the stick to Daji, who was beside him, and walked away with his hands behind his back. Bai Shanbao and Man Bao let out a breath, they looked at each other, and immediately dispersed. Those who should prepare for school should prepare for school, and those who should prepare for morning class should prepare for morning class. Bai Erlang put on his clothes, yawned and walked out of the screen. When he saw Bai Shanbao, he said listlessly, "Just now I thought it was you hitting me, but who knew it was Mr., why didn't you tell me?" Bai Shanbao, I will definitely call you tomorrow. Bai Erlang sighed and nodded, okay. If you read less scripts last night and went to bed earlier, you won't be unable to get up this morning. Bai Erlang glanced out guiltily, and said, keep your voice down, don't let the master hear you. I took a look outside before going to bed last night. The light in the main room was still on, so the husband must know that your light is on. Do you think the husband doesn't know that you read the scriptures at night? Bai Erlang had a bitter face. It's not good to live with your husband, you can't hide anything. Sigh, now that I think about it, my elder brother is actually better than me. Brother Datang is going to the capital this year to try the 6 schools, right? I do not know. Bai Shanbao despised him. What do you know? That's your big brother, you are too careless, aren't you? Bai Erlang was deep in thought but didn't speak. After Bai Shanbao had breakfast, he took a bag of snacks prepared by Aunt Rong and got in the car to go to school. Daji sent him to the door and asked, Master, do you want me to find a way to go in and take care of you? Bai Shanbao was stunned for a moment before he realized it. He smiled and said, it doesn't have to be like this, although they are not good, but this is in the government school, they haven't the guts to hit me yet. Daji was still a little worried. The young master never said anything, but he heard what he said to Miss Man and Mr. Chuang, and only then did he know about his young master being targeted at the government school. He was not afraid of anything else, but he was afraid that if they clashed in the government school, his young master would suffer. He is not very old, and it is very disadvantageous to fight with others. Bai Shanbao got off the carriage, nodded to Daji and said, don't worry, you don't need to tell grandma about this matter, I have my own way to solve it. Bai Shanbao's solution is to form cliques as well. He doesn't need much, just 2 people in the class are on his side. Bai Shanbao took his book basket and sat in his seat after arriving in the classroom. Wei Chen, who lives in the government school, came later than him. Wei Chen habitually entered through the back door, and when he saw Bai Shanbao, he smiled and said hello, Bai Dalan, you came early enough. The smile on Bai Shanbao's face froze, he tilted his head and asked, Bai Dalan. That's right. Wei Chen sat down next to him without seeing anything else, and said, didn't you say you were the only child yesterday? That's the same as me. But Bai Shanbao is not used to this address. In his memory, it is usually his cousin who is called this way, you should call me Bai Shan. That's too strange, it's better to call him Bai Dalan after all, he was a friend who came to visit and had a meal with others. Wei Chen knew him very well, so he bumped him on the shoulder and said, aren't we all friends, are you friends? Bai Shan took out a bag of snacks from his sleeve, put them in his hand and said, here, friend, here are some snacks for you, go back to your seat, I'm going to have morning class. This friend talks a lot. Wei Chen looked at the dim sum in his hand and was very happy, I didn't expect you to still think of me, brother Bai. Thank you, thank you. It just so happened that I didn't eat breakfast. Bai Shanbao was puzzled, won't it hurt my stomach if I don't eat breakfast? Oh, it's okay if you don't eat once in a while. Wei Chen waved his hand indifferently and said, didn't you get up late today? Let's have lunch earlier. Bai Shanbao has never had the experience of not eating breakfast. Since he was sensible, his grandmother taught him that even if he encounters a big problem, he should not use his body as a waste, so 3 meals a day must be eaten. At best, he eats dim sum as a main meal, but every time he does this, he is scolded and fined not to eat dim sum for several days. Wei Chen took some snacks and went back to his seat. The students in the classroom looked at them with nothing. Kang Xiaodong just came in from the door and greeted everyone and Bai Shanbao. Sit down at the front table. He sniffed, turned his head to look at the dim sum in Wei Chen's hand, and asked in a low voice, Brother Wei, did you get this dim sum from the canteen of the government school? It's really delicious. No, it was made by Bai Dalan's family. Kang Xiaodong was stunned, Bai Dalan. Wei Chen gave him a strange look. It's Bai Shan, I think you greeted him just now, you should be familiar with him, right? Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 595. Kang Xiaodong nodded subconsciously, then shook his head again, thinking that he should be the person who knew Bai Shan best in the class, so he nodded again. Seeing him nodding and shaking his head again, Wei Chen asked, "Are you stiff?" Kang Xiaodong was speechless for a while, then looked at the classmates around him, and then lowered his voice and asked, "Why do you know Brother Bai so well?" Although we have only known each other for 2 days, Kang Xiaodong already has a full understanding of Bai Shan's arrogance, which is really arrogance. The student officer in charge of their class satirized him in the first class, but Bai Shan satirized him back when he introduced himself, refusing to give in, and directly made the student officer so angry that his nose was about to smoke. Then some classmates in the class took the lead in isolating him, and even teased him secretly, and replaced him with another 12-year-old boy. No, even other adult classmates might be afraid, but he didn't. The whole person stuck back like a hedgehog covered all over his body. Anyway, there was an open and secret fight yesterday, and neither side was able to please. Although it didn't make trouble with the school officer, the students in the class also knew that the youngest boy sitting in the back was not easy to mess with. In the whole class, Kang Xiaodong was the only one who could talk to Bai Shan, and that was because they had known each other since they entered school the day before yesterday. However, Kang Xiaodong admired Bai Shan very much. Although he was the last one in the exam, to be honest, he had read his papers. It was really because he was ranked 146th, and the two had similar rankings, so he read all the test papers of the person behind him. Even if he has selfish intentions, he has to admit that Bai Shan's test papers are generally better than his. If it wasn't for the last mention, he arrogantly asked the examiners that he would be able to enter classes B and 3. It was also because of this that so many people targeted Bai Shan yesterday, so he stood up to persuade him, because he felt that although this kid was a bit arrogant, he was capable. And he wasn't arrogant towards the students like them, he was arrogant towards the examiners and school officials. Why are they messing around here? He thought he was the most familiar person in the class with Bai Shan, but now looking at the snack in Wei Chen's hand, he was a little uncertain. Many people pricked up their ears with Kang Xiaodong, and everyone wanted to know, when did the two of them get so close? Wei Chen felt that the atmosphere was a bit strange. He held the snack in his hand and asked, "What's the matter? Aren't we classmates? That's why I went to Brother Bai's house as a guest yesterday." Kang Xiaodong felt quite uncomfortable. There was a kind of sadness and resentment that he invited him but did not invite me. Bai Shanbao didn't care about them. He laid out his own books, pens, inks, papers and inkstones one by one, then opened the first book, read it for the first time, and then tried to break sentences. At this time, Man Bao had just read the text learned yesterday, and wrote the big characters that should be written in the morning, put them aside, and then looked at Mr. Zhuang. "Sir, the bookstore is open now. I'm going to buy 2 books. Mr. Zhuang looked at her for a while, then nodded slightly and said, "You go back early." Man Bao responded, and Zhou Lejun followed her. "Auntie, are the books here more expensive, or the ones in the county?" This Man Bao really didn't think about it, but she thought about it now, and said, "The commonly used books seem to be the same price, and the books that are not commonly used, and some miscellaneous books seem to be more expensive in the county. However, expensive is not the most important thing. Books are always expensive anyway," Man Bao said. "The most important thing is that there are very few books in the county town. I didn't know until I came to Fukan that there are so many books in this world." Zhou Lejun, "A lot." Man Bao nodded affirmatively, "There are a lot." It didn't take long for Zhou Lejun to see the bookstore in Yazhu City. It was really huge. Man Bao said, "This is just one of them." There are 4 such bookstores in Yazoo City. I have only been to 2. Because the other 2 are far away from here, Manbao has not been able to visit those places so far. The books that Fuxia will teach this year are very common. Zhuyi, Spring and Autumn and Book of Rites are the most important courses, in addition to Shangshu and the Doctrine of the Mean. However, the Doctrine of the Mean and Spring and Autumn Manbao and the others have already had sex with Mr. Zhuang, and she has copied both of these books. A small book. Although the proportion is small, it still needs to be learned. Manbao just helped Wei Chen look for them yesterday, and he knew their locations very well. As soon as he entered the bookstore, he went straight to the bookshelf, and found all the books she was missing in a short while. The boy was taken aback for a moment. Early in the morning, the bookstore had just opened, and there was no one in the store. As soon as Manbao came in, he bought several books, and they were so familiar with each other, the little guy couldn't help asking her, "Are you selling books?" "Manbao, buy in at the original price here, and then sell it at a high price. Who would be so stupid to buy from me, unless you count me as cheaper?" The little guy immediately said, "I'm joking with you, but why are you buying so many books? I bought it this time. I helped people find it the first 2 times." Manbao paused and asked, "That's right, what I'm doing is your job. I'll help you book, shouldn't you give me some discounts for selling books?" The boy didn't expect her to be so thick-skinned, and subconsciously looked at the shopkeeper. The shopkeeper smiled and said, "It's easy to say, it's easy to say, the little lady has indeed helped us a lot. How about it, how about I give you a piece of paper?" Manbao glanced at the paper that the shopkeeper took out, feeling a little regretful. The last thing she lacked was paper. The paper in the system mall is of good quality and cheap, and it still costs points, so she never feels sorry for using paper. But at least it was a gift, and Manbao, who had inherited the excellent quality of the old Zhou, felt that it was worthless, so he took it with a smile, and thanked him very sweetly. Manbao paid the money, put the book and paper together in the book basket and carried it up. Zhou Lijun took the book basket and was also very happy in his heart. Although the books are very expensive, it's a piece of paper for nothing. Manbao nodded happily. "You should also practice your handwriting. I will use these papers for you to practice handwriting. By the way, next time the 4th brother comes home, he should bring some back to Datu and the others. I'm not at home. I'm sure I'm not willing to spend money on paper to practice calligraphy, that's like a dog crawling on it, alas. Zhou Lijun's handwriting is also dog crawling. There is no way. They have been practicing handwriting on the ground with wooden sticks in the past few years, and they suddenly changed to soft brushes. They are not used to it. Although I have practiced for 2 years, I can barely read the words, which can't be called good anyway." When Zhou Lijun was at home, although he knew that reading was good, he was more used to going in and out with his eldest sister. When he was free, he would go out to play, go to the mountains, go to the river, and play with his friends. But when she arrived in Yazoo City, the husband was sitting in the study, the sister-in-law was studying, and the 2 young masters of the Bai family were studying. Although she occasionally couldn't stop herself and wanted to touch and walk around in the yard, in the end she still wanted to. "I will take a book and calm down and take a look." In the afternoon, she would go out for a stroll. She didn't dare to go too far for a while, so she looked around Kangxiu Street to see if there was anyone looking for a cashier. Good night. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 596. Manbao took out the newly bought Shangshu, first stumbled through the first chapter, then spread out the pen and paper, and tried to break a sentence. Finally she picked up the pen, and the cook said outside the study, "Sir, it's time for lunch." Man Bao felt that Shangshu was too difficult, so after lunch, she read it again with the book in her hand, and then tried to break the first sentence. Bai Erlang had already put away the table and went to take a nap. Zhou Lang went somewhere, and Zhou Lejun also went out. Mr. Zhuang walked behind Man Bao, watched her break a few sentences, and nodded slightly. He didn't bother Man Bao, but turned around and went back to his room for a lunch break. Man Bao only leaned on the table for more than a quarter of an hour at noon, and then went to the yard to fetch a basin of cold water to wash his face, and returned to the study in good spirits. Mr. Zhuang didn't let her study alone, so he brought his Shangshu to the study in the afternoon, and after assigning homework to Bai Erlang for him to preview, he began to teach Man Bao the correct sentence reading. Most of the sentences she made were correct, but there were always some mistakes. Mr. Zhuang read the first text once, while Man Bao directly drew a sentence on the book with a pen and read it. Mr. Zhuang glanced down. He had already discovered that the symbols used by Man Bao to read sentences were much richer than the existing ones. In addition to the commonly used dot, and, there are also, and colon that he has never seen in other books. When she was younger, it may be because her brain is not enough. He didn't have time to use these sentences when reading, and his favorite is to use slashes to divide them. Mr. Zhuang has also gotten used to her reading symbols, and he did not express any objection, because he has his own unique symbols to distinguish sentence reading, but after watching it for a long time, it may also be because Bai Shan and Bai Er also learned from her. After reading such a sentence, he also felt that her sentence was more suitable. Mr. Zhuang waited for her to finish the sentence before he said, "Shangshu is different from other books." Man Bao looked up at him. Mr. Zhuang paused and said, "Actually, the Shangshu is also considered a history book. People often say that the Shangshu is a fake." Huh, Man Bao's eyes widened. Mr. Zhuang smiled when he saw it, and stretched out his hand to pat her on the head, but when he realized that his disciple was not young, he withdrew his hand again and said with a smile, "The Shangshu is said to be the legacy of the 3 graves and 5 classics. It was handed down by Fu Sheng in the Han dynasty, but later King Lu Gong found another Shangshu when he demolished a section of the wall of Confucius' former residence." Not only Man Bao was dumbfounded, but Bai Erlang, who was riding beside him, couldn't help but raise his head. When Mr. Zhuang saw it, a smile flashed in his eyes, and he said with a smile, "That's why people in the world call the former Jin Wen Shangshu, and the latter Gu Wen Shangshu. The smile in Mr. Zhuang's eyes slowly disappeared, and he sighed, "It's a pity that after the war, after the Wei dynasty, all the ancient and modern Shangshu were lost." Man Bao couldn't help but look down at the Shangshu in his hand, then this. Mr. Zhuang was silent for a while and then said, "This is a recompilation of later generations after collecting scattered articles." Man Bao looked at her husband's face, blinked suspiciously, and asked, "Don't you believe me, sir?" Mr. Zhuang was silent for a long time until Man Bao's neck was almost stiff, then he sighed and said quietly, "I checked many classics for my teacher, and found that some historians suspected that this Shangshu was fabricated by later generations, the real Shangshu. All the Shangshu have been lost. However, the teacher is weak and the books he can read are limited, so it is not difficult to draw a conclusion." Man Bao looked down at the book in his hand and asked, "Then do we still need to study Shangshu?" "Of course there is," Mr. Zhuang said with a smile. "Historical materials cannot be judged solely on the basis of authenticity, because—" Mr. Zhuang frowned, and found that it was not easy to teach. He paused for a while before coming up with an appropriate example, and motioned her to take a pen to record. "Today, you write down the words 3 chickens for breakfast, and then write down the paper was sealed, and after thousands of years, some descendants took it out. Is this historical material true?" Man Bao thought for a while and said, "Forget it, this is not a forgery, it was indeed written by me, an ancient man." Mr. Zhuang nodded, "Then I ate 3 eggs today, and those 3 eggs are still flat." Man Bao shook his head. So you see, is this historical material true or false? Man Bao shook his head and nodded. Mr. Zhuang said with a smile, these ancient books are also the same. When they are passed on, they will be modified and expanded by later generations, such as Shui Jingzhu. This is a very successful expansion and modification. The text will also be changed in name only. As for this Shangshu, due to our limited ability, we have very little income. No one knows what kind of situation it is, but this book has been studied by others, which shows that it has the value of learning. Mr. Zhuang said, the Shangshu has a lot of records, the most important of which are 16 characters. Mr. Zhuang said word by word, people's hearts are only in danger, and Dao's heart is only weak, there is only one essence, and you are allowed to stick to it. This is the way to be a king. Bai Erlang read it twice and found it difficult to understand, so he called out, Sir, is this a bit different from what you said before to be a king? Man Bao was thinking about it. When he heard the words, he patted his head with his backhand, and said, it's really stupid, this gentleman is not that gentleman, this is the way to be an emperor. Bai Erlang stared, lowered his voice instantly, looked around and asked in a low voice, Sir, is it okay for us to learn this? Mr. Zhuang was full of emotions, and then he dissipated. He looked at the three apprentices speechlessly and said, what's the problem? Could it be that after learning the Shangshu, you are going to be the emperor? Man Bao giggled, and said, the purpose of asking you to study Shangshu is to remonstrate the emperor's behavior and to be a good courtier. Mr. Zhuang nodded slightly, thought about it but felt something was wrong, looked down at Man Bao, you really think so? Yes, and you can learn a lot of truths after reading it, sir, start teaching me. Mr. Zhuang said, I haven't studied the Shangshu much as a teacher, so I can only teach you a little bit. When Shenbao comes back from the government school, you can ask him who taught him the Shangshu. The two learn from each other. Man Bao answered. Mr. Zhuang explained the definition of the first text to Man Bao, and then asked her to study by herself. He went out to make tea and eat snacks first. Bai Erlang glanced out quietly, poked Man Bao with a book and asked, did Shan Bao get bullied in the government school? Huh? How do you know? Bai Erlang curled his lips and said, yesterday morning, you were still yelling that you should concentrate on medical skills in the afternoon, but today you are holding a copy of Shangshu and chewing on it? He said, I've been bullied, what's the use of just reading a book? Let's take Brother Joe and Daji last week, and put those people in sacks and beat them up. That's not good, after all, they didn't do anything. Man Bao said, at least we have to wait for them to do it first. Why wait for others to strike first? Don't you know there is a saying that it is better to strike first? I know, but we still have a government office above us. What if you hit someone and got caught? So there's a difference between attacking first and attacking later, you know. The next chapter is around 6 o'clock in the afternoon. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 597. Bai Erlang said he didn't know. If you are bullied, you can beat him back. That's what he did in Qilai village, and no one dared to go to his house to complain, let alone go to the yamen. But he also knew that this place was different from Qilai village, so he was just puzzled, would they really sue the yamen for such a humiliating thing? Man Bao, anyway, I will go. Bai Erlang curled his lips, little man. Man Bao slapped him, stared and said, say it again. Bai Erlang was furious, if you hit someone now, I will sue the yamen. Man Bao, little man. Man Bao decided not to read books with the villain, so he took the Shangshu and took a medical book to the yard to memorize. After the government school finished, Bai Shenbao came back directly and didn't stay in the school for a long time. When he got home, he took out his textbook and complained, gentlemen, only let us memorize the book first, and don't give lectures. Shangshu is very difficult. I read it for a long time, and only came up with 2 chapters. I don't know why. Right or wrong, but I reread Spring and Autumn and got something out of it. Man Bao also took out his own textbook and said, I have read the first chapter of Shangshu smoothly, and I plan to memorize it tomorrow. Bai Shanbao picked up her textbook, read the sentence accordingly, and then looked at her notes. The two discuss while reading, ask about what you understand and what I don't understand, write down what you don't understand or are not sure, and plan to ask your husband later. Mr. Zhuang is at home and can ask for advice at any time. At this moment, Bai Shanbao felt that studying with Mr. Zhuang at home is also good, so there is no need to go to the government school. Thinking about it this way, Bai Shanbao wanted to go home even more. Every day in the government school, he either reviewed the texts he had learned before or practiced calligraphy. He only previewed the rest of the time and studied with Man Bao when he went back. He did not study with other students. It is equally difficult to memorize the text. After 3 days like this, the government school gradually quieted down, and the academic officials gathered all the students together to read the rules of the government school. During the class, students are not allowed to enter or leave the school at will, nor can they bring people in and out of the school at will. In the future, if relatives come to the school, they must register. If you go out during class, you must get the signatures of more than 2 teachers. After reading the rules, the entire school began to enter the formal teaching mode. Bai Shanbao's first class was Shangshu, and he was taught by the student officer whom he hated and who also hated him. His class speed is much faster than that of Mr. Zhuang. In the first class, he read the text directly and quickly. Even if he read a sentence, he didn't explain why the sentence was so broken, and he didn't give the students time to ask questions. He said directly, now that the sentence has been read, you have to memorize this text before tomorrow, and I will explain the meaning tomorrow. Bai Shanbao. Mr. Zhuang always gave them the explanation first before asking them to endorse it, and it happened the other way around here at Fuxiu. Fortunately, other teachers are not like this. For example, the gentleman who teaches Spring and Autumn is like telling stories in class. He has never heard Mr. Zhuang tell some of the stories, so even though Bai Shan has already studied Spring and Autumn, I still listen to it with gusto when I study again. Of course, in the end, the master of Spring and Autumn also asked them to memorize the text, also before tomorrow. On the first day of formal class, Bai Shanbao brought back 4 homeworks that were to be memorized before tomorrow. He said to Manbao with a happy face, fortunately, we learned and memorized in advance these 3 days, otherwise tomorrow I can't bear it. Manbao blinked, tell me, will the gentleman remind you to get up and endorse tomorrow? Bai Shanbao, there are 20 people in our class, I can't be so unlucky, can I? Who knows? Bai Shanbao is really so unlucky, and I don't know if those gentlemen are simply interested in him, or because of the student officer who always targets him. Anyway, the first person who clicks to stand up and endorse in class must be Bai Shanbao. At first, Bai Shanbao didn't matter, but when he was called out for the 3rd time, he couldn't help but a fire rose in his heart, and then he raised his chin with fighting spirit, and recited the textbook in a rhythmic manner. Want to see his jokes? Go dreaming in your next life. Mr. Zai, who taught them Spring and Autumn, squinted his eyes at Bai Shan for a while, nodded, and motioned him to sit down. The last class is the class of their class supervisor and the academic officer. As soon as he entered the door, he said expressionlessly, spot check the homework assigned yesterday, Bai Shan, get up and memorize the article taught you yesterday. The remaining 19 students in Class C turned their heads to look behind in unison, with unstoppable sympathy and gloating on their faces. In fact, quite a few students were called up, but Bai Shan is the only student who has been called up 4 times. After all, it is impossible for every gentleman to randomly select the student's name to be the same every time, right? Bai Shan stood up with a blank face, closed the textbook in his hand, and then watched the instructor start to recite, and he only recited for a little while, and the instructor suddenly interrupted him. Explain the sentence you just recited. Bai Shan paused and recited the explanation. He Swagwen frowned, did not question, and nodded his chin slightly, telling him to carry on. Bai Shan was interrupted, and after a moment of silence, he got up and continued to carry on. In the middle, I was interrupted twice by the school officer before I could completely memorize the text. He Swagwen said with a blank expression, one day and one night, I have to stumble on my memorization. If you come to the government school, if you don't want to study seriously, you should leave as soon as possible, and don't waste the rice grain of the court here. Except for Bai Shan, the rest of the students lowered their heads, feeling very guilty. If they were scolded like this, then they would not be scolded to death when it was their turn. It was their turn that they were not scolded, because the academic officer didn't interrupt the students reciting. Even if the students stumbled during the reciting, he just frowned and didn't say anything. Everyone finished reading Shangsha carefully, and then heaved a sigh of relief after leaving with the academic officer, and immediately collected their things and left school. Let's find a place to memorize the text. I think I have to do a spot check tomorrow. With a sullen face, Bai Shanbao also put away his things, put them in the book basket, closed the book basket with a snap, picked it up and left. Wei Chen quickly caught up with his book basket and asked, wait a minute, Baida, did you offend the gentleman? Bai Shanbao snorted coldly and quickened his pace. Hey, slow down, it's a big deal to offend Mr. You have to find a way to solve it, otherwise Mr. Everyday will target you. Hello Mr. Zai. Wei Chen stopped in a hurry, with a flattering expression on his face, looked at Zai Yang and smiled. Mr. Zai stroked his grey beard, nodded to him, and asked, Wei Chen, I don't seem to have asked you to get up and recite today. How is your recitation of spring and autumn going? Wei Chen immediately turned around and slipped away holding the book basket. Mr. Zai, I've already memorized it, but I think I should be more familiar with it, so I'm going to memorize it. He gave Bai Shan a comforting look, and said in a low voice, you take care of yourself. The next update will be around 9 p.m. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 598. Bai Shan reluctantly bowed to Mr. Zai. When Mr. Zai saw him, he stroked his grey beard and asked with a smile, why, did you bother me to ask you to get up and answer the question? Students dare not. Looking at the expression on his face, Mr. Zai felt amused in his heart. He was really proud. He beckoned, signaling Bai Shan to go with him. Lan Zhongcheng took the task to go to Zizhu, and I'm afraid he won't come back until after the Dragon Boat Festival. Bai Shan was slightly surprised. He didn't expect Mr. Zai to tell him this. Mr. Zai looked at him and smiled. Do you know why we like you to answer questions? Bai Shan said depressedly, because you don't like me. Mr. Zai burst into laughter when he heard this, put his hands behind his back, and walked slowly. He Qingping is why I can't control it, but I ordered you because of your paper. He Qingping is the student officer of Class C and Class 1. Mr. Zai said without hesitation, I am one of the examiners of your paper. I think that although you are young and wild, you feel a little wronged at the end. Then you still target me? The thought flashed by, but Bai Shan reacted, and couldn't help but pause. Not necessarily against him, but out of admiration for him. Bai Shan stared at him with wide eyes. Mr. Zai also stopped, looked back at him, and seeing his staring round eyes, he couldn't help laughing and said, I'm the student officer of Class A and Class 3, so if you can pass the year-end exam hundreds, how about I put you in Class A and 3? There are 20 students in a class, and only the top 60 can enter Class A and Class 3, so Mr. Zai thinks that this condition is already very talented. But Bai Shan doesn't think so. He frowned and asked, could it be replaced by the mid-year exam? Mr. Zai raised his eyebrows. That would be difficult. Usually only after the end of year exams can we be divided into classes. Then what if I can get into the top 60 in the mid-year exam? You are quite confident. Mr. Zai shook his head and said with a smile, although you are good, there are others out there, and the top 100 in this school examination is not bad. Bai Shan said seriously, I know, so I will work hard. Mr. Zai thought for a while, nodded and said, that's fine, as long as you can enter the top 60, even if you are the 60th, you can come in openly. Bai Shan's ambition was ignited, and he couldn't help showing a bright smile on his face. He was about to jump up and run back to tell his husband the great news with the book basket in his hand. But just started thinking of something, couldn't help but stop, turned around and asked, Mr. Zai, don't you really know why he Swaigwan is targeting me? Mr. Zai just smiled and said nothing. Bai Shan knew at a glance that he couldn't ask any more questions, so he didn't ask any more, and after a salute, he happily left. If he doesn't tell him, he will know one day. After Mr. Zhuang knew Mr. Zai's promise, he also felt that it might be better for Bai Shan to study in a different environment, so he also paid close attention to teaching him. As for the study at the government school, Bai Shan is also slowly getting on the right track. As Mr. Zhuang said, these gentlemen of the government school are not weaker than him in knowledge, especially compared with Mr. Zhuang, they are more specialized. For example, Mr. Zai, he mainly teaches history books such as Spring and Autumn and Hanchu. He is very proficient in history. His lectures are slightly different from Mr. Zhuang's lectures, and so are the other gentlemen. It is Bai Shan who dislikes He Swaigwan, and his research on Shangshi should be more thorough, although his teaching method is disliked by Bai Shan, and the students in Class C are complaining. But it is undeniable that after listening to his class, Bai Shanbao took his questions back to answer Mr. Zhuang, and what he got was much more than his classmates. Similarly, Man Bao also learned a lot from Bai Shan's notes. The two of them learned from each other, and with Mr. Zhuang's guidance, they made rapid progress, especially Bai Shan. From the first day of formal class, he was far ahead of his classmates. After class, everyone isolated him, secretly discussing and mocking him, but in class, he was able to crush everyone. No matter in the class of Mr. Zai and other gentlemen, or in the class that always deliberately targeted him and the instructors, he was always dazzling enough to make people itch. Then, someone broke away from the team that isolated him, and got in touch with Bai Shan through Kong Xiaodong and Wei Chen. But Bai Shan was still so arrogant that he didn't want to talk to them, mainly because he held grudges. Although there was no conflict between the two sides, he remembered that these people also pointed at him and whispered when he was isolated. Although he looked down on them very much in his heart, Bai Shan did not openly make enemies, but just nodded perfunctorily. In the end, these people actually felt that they were used to it, thinking that Bai Shan was always like this. Of course, since the enemy has surrendered, they will naturally express it. What they said was gossip about why the school officials targeted him. Bai Shan originally wanted to pack up his book basket and leave, but when he heard their discussion, he stopped again and couldn't help but prick up his ears to listen. Speaking of which, Bai Shan, you really suffered an innocent disaster. I heard that your grades were more than 150. It was the king of Yazhu who set the rankings, saying that you are arrogant, so I want to kill your spirit, so it's set at 150. Bai Shan, why am I so arrogant? Didn't I just ask a few questions on the last question? Since childhood, we have been taught to know what you know and don't know what you don't know. If you don't know, you have to ask. From the time he entered school to the present, how much he has been wronged because of those questions. Did he say anything? Why are you so arrogant? A few classmates smiled awkwardly, they didn't believe it at all in their hearts, but they said, but the Lord and the school officials don't believe it. I heard that your papers couldn't even be nominated at the beginning. You lost the election, and Mr. Pian Lan interceded for you, so you have a chance to enter the final election. Bai Shan asked, then, what does this have to do with the academic officer? Of course it has something to do with it, you don't know, and the nephew of the academic officer also took the prefectural examination this year, and he also entered the last selection, but he failed. Later, the academic officers ranked in private, and he was photographed in the 151st. If your papers hadn't been picked up by Mr. Lan and then recommended, then the nephew of He Suiguan is the one who is enrolled now. That's right, and I heard that senior officer He and Mr. Lan have always been at odds. You have been favored by Mr. Lan, so you belong to his side. Of course senior officer He doesn't like you anymore. This time, because of his nephew, the academic officer deliberately avoided taking part in the examination. I don't know how many things he missed. In the end, what was a sure thing turned into nothing. It's no wonder he wasn't annoyed. Bai Shan's face was expressionless, but he thought to himself, that's because his nephew is not capable enough, and he blames me instead. Who is to blame for me? But Bai Shan finally knew the reason why he was being targeted, and his heart was completely dropped. Good night. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 599. Knowing the reason, Bai Shan became more fearless and studied harder. Not only the students in Class C and Number 1 felt the pressure, but even Man Bao, who had never fallen behind him, felt the strain. So after weighing it up, she put the courses in the system aside first, and took a long vacation with teacher Mo every day, apart from reading medical books before going to bed, and reviewing the past to learn new things. She devoted all her mind to learning the current ones. Knowledge. In addition to learning the same books as Bai Shan, Mr. Zhuang taught her 2 extra courses, which were what she should have learned. Seeing her read so many books and do so much homework every day, Bai Erlang felt bald for her. Man Bao is very used to it, mainly because there is nothing interesting recently. Moreover, she thinks it is very interesting to help Bai Shanbao and those people from the government school to fight in the ring. In addition, Bai Shan is as excited as if he had been beaten every morning, so she is also very passionate. Bai Erlang was flanked by 2 big mountains, and Mr. Zhuang was on his head. He was tense every day, trying to find time to be lazy, but at the same time he was guilty and afraid, forcing himself to study. After a few days, he couldn't stand it anymore. Taking advantage of Mr. Zhuang's teaching Man Bao, he sneaked out of the study under the pretext of going to the toilet, and then turned a corner in the yard, where the area next to the utility room was full of flowers and plants. Squat down on the ground. This happened to be a blind corner of the study, and no one would be able to see him unless he stood at the gate of the courtyard and looked in. Bai Erlang sighed deeply. Zhou Lejun, who was weeding with a small flower hoe, raised his head to look at him, and asked, "What are you doing?" Bai Erlang didn't notice that there were people here, so he was startled and sat down on the ground. He looked up, only to find that there was a wooden barrel beside Zhou Lejun, which just blocked most of her figure. He was so distracted just now that he didn't notice her at all. Bai Erlang patted his chest and let out a breath. "Can't you make a sound? I don't know that people will die if they scare people." Zhou Lejun was speechless. "I've been weeding here all the time, and there's still no sound. How loud do you want to be? You're the one who came later, okay." Bai Erlang waved his hand and said, forget it, I don't blame you anymore." Zhou Lejun looked him up and down, and asked, "Are you playing truant? What are you running away from?" "It's just in a courtyard, where can I escape to?" Bai Erlang said. "Even if I play truant, I'm also fleeing abroad. Will I squat here?" Anyway, he had already sat down on the ground, and Bai Erlang didn't bother to get up, so he simply sat on the ground with his legs crossed, and sighed, I just came out to rest, your sister-in-law is terrible, I really don't want to be a classmate with her. Zhou Lejun lowered his head and continued weeding, saying, you are too lazy. I'm much more diligent now than when I was at home, Bai Erlang said unconvinced, they didn't learn like this before. Zhou Lejun didn't feel how hard it was to study, and said, my aunt will come out every half hour to play for a while, and have snacks from time to time. You have more rest time than my aunt. What's so tiring? She said, when the farming season is busy, we go to the fields before dawn, and we don't go home until the sun goes down. That's tiring. Bai Erlang thought about it for a while, but felt that something was wrong, you are not always busy with farming. You guys haven't been studying all the time, it's only been a few days since then, Zhou Lejun said, I heard what my sister said, after the mid-year exam is over, this matter will be settled. It's been a long time in the middle of the year. Zhou Lejun rolled his eyes and said, it's only a month or so, what's the long time, I'm not in a hurry to find a job for so long. Don't look for it, you won't be able to find a job as an accountant. It's possible to be an embroiderer. That's even more impossible, Zhou Lejun said, I can still settle accounts as an accountant, and as an embroiderer, should I tie myself or zabu? Bai Erlang laughed out loud when he heard the words, he couldn't be happier. Mr. Zhuang didn't know where the kid was hiding at first, so he stood at the door of the study and looked around after teaching Man Bao, but he knew where he was hiding when he heard the laughter. He shook his head, but didn't call him back. Learning also pays attention to relaxation. Both Shenbao and Manbao are smart and resilient, so they can be a little bit tighter and more rewarding that way. But by if the boy stretched too tightly, he might break, so he should loosen it appropriately. Just like this, under the atmosphere where you are studying hard and I am working hard to play truant, the middle of the year is still coming, and the Dragon Boat Festival is coming first, isn't this nonsense? The Dragon Boat Festival is a big festival, and the school is closed for 3 days, and some outstanding students are organized to participate in official activities in the government office. Of course Bai Shanbao was not on this list, and all the students in Class C and Class 1 were not on this list, so he happily put away his book basket and went home. Kang Xiaodong's family is in Yizhu, so he naturally went back to spend the holidays with his family. Wei Chen came to look for Bai Shanbao, and asked enthusiastically, Brother Bai, how did you spend the Dragon Boat Festival? Bai Shan, a frog in a well who has been living in Qilai village for many years, took it for granted, let's eat zongzi. Wei Chen, you didn't think about going somewhere to play? Oh, yes, Man Bao has long said that during the Dragon Boat Festival, we will go to play by the river with many flowers and plants. We should go out of the city. What's so fun about going out of the city? Wei Chen said, from tomorrow onwards, there will be a Nyo opera in the city. I heard that the government paid for a team, and they will fight along the main street to the moat. There are still people competing in the river, the boat is fun. Bai Shanbao was very moved when he heard it, and asked, is it so lively? Isn't it? Everyone outside the city wants to come in, but you want to go out of the city. There are no interesting things outside the city. Wei Chen warmly invited, how about it, let's go to the street together tomorrow, and you too, you know, I don't have any other friends in Yizhu city. Bai Shanbao thought about it for a while, and felt that it should not be difficult to convince Man Bao. As for Bai he didn't think about it, as long as there was something to play with, he would do it. So he nodded, and made an appointment with Wei Chen for the time and place to meet the next day. All the way home, he found that there were more pedestrians on the street than usual, and there were a lot of sachets and various ghost masks hanging on the small stalls on the road. Bai Shan is a little stronger than Man Bao, and occasionally he can go to Lujiang County to play during the Dragon Boat Festival, but most of them spend time in the village. After all, in Meidour, the old people don't like their children traveling far away. As for the liveliness of Lujiang County, at most, there are more people on the street and more things for sale, and the colors are not as bright as they are now. Bai Shan watched the excitement all the way back home. He jumped out of the carriage and ran into the yard without even taking his own book basket. But Man Bao and Bai Erlang, who had been studying at home, knew nothing about the excitement outside. When Bai Shan ran back, Man Bao was still holding a book in the yard, shaking his head and reading. Next update around 6 p.m. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 600. Bai Shanbao persuaded Manbao to stay and play in the city tomorrow. He said, I heard from Wei Chen that the city is very interesting. There are not only boat races, but also Nyo opera. Have you seen Nyo opera? Manbao shook his head, I haven't seen it, have you seen it? I vaguely remember seeing it once in Longzhou when I was a child. I don't remember it very clearly. Anyway, it's very interesting. It's for exorcising ghost epidemics. It's fun to wear a mask on your face. Manbao was very moved by what he said, but she promised KK to find something good for it. Seeing her move, Bai Shanbao continued, it's the Dragon Boat Festival, there must be a lot of flower sellers on the street, the ones you planted in the yard haven't bloomed, but I see that there are quite a few on the street, then we will buy some nice to come back. But what she wanted was not the flowers she had seen on the street, but the flowers she had never seen before. Manbao was thinking so, and KK suddenly said, the host can go if he wants, but don't forget to make up for me after the Dragon Boat Festival. Manbao's eyes lit up, and he immediately responded happily in his heart. Keek added, if you see a creature you haven't seen tomorrow, remember to include it. Manbao got the benefit, so he agreed without even thinking about it. Manbao nodded to Bai Shanbao, okay, tomorrow we will go to the street to watch a Nyo opera. So Bai Shanbao was happy, Manbao was happy, and Keek was also satisfied. Seeing that the two of them settled down by themselves, Bai Erlang was a little unhappy, why don't you ask me? Bai Shanbao lowered his head and looked at him sitting on the wicker chair strangely, aren't you going? Go. Bai Shanbao, isn't that all right? He turned his head to look at Manbao, and asked, what did the master teach you today? The two went to discuss and study. Shirajiro. He puffed his cheeks and decided to ignore them, but after a while, he couldn't help but talk to the two of them, is there really going to be a Nyo show tomorrow? Then should we also buy some masks? The two people who were talking about their homework were immediately distracted. Bai Shanbao said, when I came back just now, the street was very lively. Manbao was very excited, then shall we go out to play later? Why wait a while, let's go out now. Bai Shanbao left as soon as he said that, turned around and ran to take the book basket in Daji's hand, carried it back to his room, and then stuffed a few coins into his purse. He ran out to greet his two friends, let's go. Every day after school is free time, Mr. Zhuang never restricts them to study, it all depends on their own self-consciousness, so they want to run out to play, no one stops them. Daegil silently follows them out. The cook heard the movement and ran out and told her, Master, come back earlier, I'm going to start making dinner. Bai Shanbao waved his hand indifferently, then turned to ask Manbao, where are brother Zhou and Zhou Lejun? Going out, Manbao went out of the alley and was surprised to see so many new stalls on the street. It's so lively. The three of them walked along the street, and soon they saw a booth selling masks, and they couldn't help but swarmed up to pick them out. On some of the larger booths, there are a lot of ghost faces, and they are also very scary, with a lot of colors. Manbao chose one to wear on his face, and asked Bai Shanbao, are you afraid? Bai Shanbao took a look, shook his head and said, I'm not afraid. He put on his own and asked, where's mine? It's not scary either. Suddenly a hand was placed on the shoulders of the two of them, they couldn't help turning their heads together, A hideous ghost face suddenly appeared in front of them. The two couldn't help but yelled in unison, and took a step back. Bai Erlang took off the mask and laughed at the two of them. He couldn't be happier. Did it scare you? Ha 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 ha, this mask is only scary if you put it on secretly while hiding yourself. Just look at what scares the other person wearing it of. The two felt that what he said was very reasonable, so they looked at each other, turned around and bought two masks that looked the scariest to the stall owner. Sister, seeing Man Bao, Zhou Lejun hurried over with a basket on his back. Sister, what are you doing here? Buy a mask. Man Bao generously put one of the masks in his hand on her face for comparison, and said with a smile, this one is also very suitable for you, so I'll give it to you. Bai Shanbao glanced at her pannier and asked, what are you doing here? My fourth uncle and I went out of the city, Zhou Lejun said happily. Sister-in-law, you don't know that wormwood sells better in Yazhu City. We went out early this morning to cut wormwood and tied it into a small bundle. A small bundle, and it took only half a day to sell them all, which is more expensive than selling them in the county. How expensive? A bundle of 4 wen coins. My uncle and I occupied a booth. We sold more than 100 bundles in total. We plan to set up a stall in the morning, Zhou Lejun said. Uncle Si is still cutting moxa outside the city now. Grass, because I'm afraid you are worried, so let me come back early to say, he may return late. Man Bao responded, expressing that he knew. Bai Shanbao and Bai Erlang expressed their incomprehension. You can sell wormwood? Isn't this stuff everywhere? Of course I can. My second brother sold wormwood in the county a few years ago. Bai Shanbao suddenly realized, let me tell you, why every dragon boat festival people say that all the good wormwood near the village is cut off, and they have to go far away to cut the wormwood. Bai Erlang also remembered, the little friend who played with me has to take a sickle to the field ridge far away every dragon boat festival to cut it. It turns out that all the good wormwood near the entrance of the village was cut by your family. Man Bao blinked, they're all wild ones, it's better to strike first. Who told them not to cut them 2 days in advance? This stuff can be found everywhere in the village. It would be nice to cut it back on the day of the Dragon Boat Festival and put in fresh ones. Why do you have to cut it in advance? Bai Shanbao said, who would have thought that your family would even sell wormwood? Man Bao snorted, many people in the village know about it. Bai Shanbao said that he didn't know, otherwise he would have taken a sickle and cut many of them back home in advance, and put one on each doorframe. The 4 of them bought masks, watched some interesting things on the street, and then walked home slowly. After all, it's getting late today, and they decided to come out early tomorrow to play. Bai Erlang was very fortunate. Fortunately, Mr. Zhuang didn't give me homework. I'll go to bed early at night, come out early tomorrow, and play later. Man Bao also nodded happily. Bai Shanbao, I have homework. Man Bao and Bai Erlang gave him a sympathetic look, expressing their helplessness. But Bai Shanbao stared at Man Bao and said, we agreed to study together, but we also have difficulties. You can't count your words. Helping with homework is unethical. You can choose, either do half of it for me and I will copy it, or do all the questions I did. You promised to study with me. Man Bao thought for a while, and decisively chose the immoral first option. Then you have to hide from MR. The next update will be around 9 p.m.